All right, well, good evening. It's 6:31, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Carmen Bishop. I'm in zoning administration, and I'm joined by Katie Herman. She is in the planning division, and we are both with the Department of Planning and Development. So thank you for joining us. This is a community input session on the Guidelines for Data Centers project. So before we get started, we're going to have a few slides to start us off. And then we do want to have some time for questions and comments. So a few housekeeping items. Please do keep your audio muted. Then at the end, when we have the discussion time, we'll call on you to unmute. But in the meantime, so that everybody can hear well, if you can keep your audio muted. You can also use the chat function to post questions and provide comments. We will try to keep track of the questions. We're probably not going to read a lot of the comments because everyone can certainly read those as we go along. Now, when we do get to the discussion time, I see we have 44 participants so far. And so we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak if they want to. So we'd ask you to keep your initial comments brief, maybe to a minute or two. And then after everyone who wants to speak has gotten to do that, then we can circle back around and people can get second chances. So with that, I will say this title, Guidelines for Data Centers, is the title of our project because that was the title of the board matter that was approved on May 9th. And this board matter directed staff to research the environmental issues and potential mitigations related to data centers, to develop locational guidelines, to review how data centers should be approved, and to consider if those guidelines should be in the comprehensive plan and or the zoning ordinance.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Herman, and Carmen, thank you so much for that introduction. For this slide, we just wanted to show everyone on the line here a general outline of our schedule for this board matter. During the initial research phase and into the fall timeframe here of 2023, we've been meeting and talking with a wide range of stakeholders and doing a lot of research ahead of some future meetings here with the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission, which will start later this month and as we head towards the end of this calendar year. And I'll just remind everyone here in the audience that this project is mainly intended to provide preliminary analysis and recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. Next, the board may direct staff to prepare proposed amendments to the comprehensive plan and or the zoning ordinance for those amendments that would go through their own process, including public hearings before the Planning Commission and the board. Thankfully, we are working with a great team of other county staff members. Included in that team are folks from various departments and agencies. So we've got others within the Department of Planning and Development that we're working with, our Land Development Services Department, as well as our Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, DPW and ES. Then we're also working with the Office of Environmental and Energy Coordination, or OEEC, because we all love acronyms here at the county. And then last but not least, thankfully, we've had the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District as part of our team as well.
All right, so just a little bit of background, what we're talking about here tonight. When we say that something is in the cloud, of course, we don't really mean it's in the cloud, it's in a data center. And there are different ways that you can define a data center, but for our purposes, we are really thinking of those like not a small server room or an IT closet, but rather a facility that is purpose-built to house computer servers and their network connections where most or all of the building is for that purpose. And these buildings are typically designed with optimal cooling and other systems to support the servers. They are designed with security in mind. We want to keep our data safe. They are built for 99.999% reliability, because when you want to Google what is a data center or tap your Visa card, or whatever it is you want to do, you definitely want it to work. And there has been a lot of growth in data centers in the past number of years, and that is projected to continue. And that's because there are more and more people online, and all of the different business apps, finance, entertainment, you want to stream Netflix, education, healthcare, all of these different components of our lives depend on data centers. And of course, new things coming down the pike with artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles. Maybe I'll just say the cloud's the limit. But a little bit of other background. So if you want to see a data center, you really don't have to go far. So Loudoun County, our neighbor, they are the leading data center area of the country, maybe the world, I don't know, but they definitely have a lot of them. They have over 100 data center projects and over 24, or maybe I even read 25 million square feet of data centers. And that's not by accident. So the telecom companies that called Northern Virginia home, like AOL, that was originally in the Tysons area, then as they outgrew their servers, in their Tysons office building, they built one of the first data centers in Ashburn in 1996. And these telecom companies, they supported the development of the fiber connections that are needed to connect the servers to the world. Typically, a business may start by housing their own servers in their own office. And then as they grow, they may want, instead of having to maintain and cool their own servers, they're going to maybe use a cloud computing service like AWS or Google, where they can take advantage of the resources of a data center and actually have improved data processing, storage, and efficiency. So as I mentioned, Loudoun definitely has a lot of data centers, and Prince William, our other neighbor, they are also getting a lot of data centers. Fairfax County, we don't have as many as Loudoun for sure, but we have a few. There are different ways you can count data centers. So for this slide, when I say there are 12 or more data centers, we're counting 12 or more existing parcels that have data centers. And then, as I mentioned, we're looking at where all or most of a building is designed for that purpose. Now, 2 of those on that 12 list are actually on Fort Belvoir, and those are not subject to land use controls, but I added them in the list anyway. And then there are a few more that are smaller that we're still researching. Now, those existing data centers, they range in age and size from about 30,000 square feet to 500,000 square feet. Now, we've got 5 more data center projects that are in progress, and they range in size from about 240,000 square feet to over 2 million square feet. Now, when I say in progress, these are projects that have site plan and building permit approval for at least a first phase, and some of them are under construction. And then there is also one data center project that is pending a rezoning and special exception application.
Thanks, Carmen. So as we step forward with having that background information of what a data center is and how the county has been looking at data centers as a type of use and how frequent how many data centers we have in the county, we thought it would be helpful to just overview some of the policies and ordinances in place currently at the county that we use to help review and assess data centers. So I'm going to speak to the comprehensive plan first. Within the comprehensive plan, currently we have a land use element of our policy plan. And within that land use element, we have an existing Appendix 12 that specifically has performance criteria that are used by staff to help review special exceptions for data centers in an industrially planned parcels. These criteria ensure that these proposals are compatible with surrounding uses, and those 5 criteria and some conversations about these items are grouped that way in Appendix 12.
The zoning ordinance also, it does have a data center use. It is within the industrial use classification. And I'm going to it's short, so I'm just going to read you the definition from the zoning ordinance. It is a facility containing one or more large-scale computer systems used for data storage and processing for off-site users. Typical supporting equipment includes backup batteries and power generators, cooling units, fire suppression systems, and enhanced security features. So that's what we're talking about for zoning purposes. Data centers under the zoning ordinance are currently allowed in the C3 and C4 office districts, but they're only up to 40,000 square feet of gross floor area is by right. In the I2 and I3 industrial districts, it's also allowed by right, but only up to 80,000 square feet of gross floor area. Then in all 4 of those districts, a larger size is allowed if they are repurposing an existing building or with special exception approval. Special exceptions require a public hearing before the Planning Commission as well as the Board of Supervisors. The zoning ordinance does currently allow data centers by right in the I4, I5, and I6 industrial districts. And then they are allowed in certain of the planned or P districts, but those do require approval by the board. And then I'll just highlight one of the standards. The zoning ordinance requires your HVAC and emergency generators to be enclosed. However, that requirement does not apply in the I4, I5, and I6 districts. The zoning ordinance has requirements for transitional screening. These are landscaped screening yards that are on the use that's more intense. And there are many adjacent uses that would require transitional screening from a data center. I'm just on this slide, we just have single family as an example. So I don't want you to think that's the only one. But the zoning ordinance currently requires what's called a type 2 transitional screening yard next to single family, and that's a 35-foot buffered area. We do have a draft pending landscaping and screening zoning ordinance amendment. That's a separate effort. And under the new construct as part of that amendment, a data center as an industrial use would require a 50-foot landscape buffer, and that is the highest that we have. For parking purposes, data centers don't typically need a lot of parking. So with the parking reimagined change that was approved and will go into effect on January 1st, I think, it would require 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet as calculated over the office area.
Okay, thanks, Carmen. So to give everyone an update on where the pieces that we've completed to this point, as we started the research phase of this project, we kind of formed ourselves around 6 different topic areas, which are listed here. We're still wrapping up our researching phase, and we're starting to compile information. And we want to be clear that right now, tonight, we do not have any recommendations or options to present at this point. Again, the whole hope and desire of this meeting is that we'd love to hear from you all about some of these topics. So I think we have about 3 or 4 more slides left, and those slides will offer a few high-level county staff takeaways that we've heard related to these topics. And while they may not be listed here, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that data centers provide tax revenue and good job wages and are part of the tech ecosystem that we all use every day and for this call. So we tackled energy and water demand obviously pretty early on and set up quite a few interviews with our stakeholders about these two topics. These are two very prevalent systems in our area, especially related to data centers. And what we've learned is that the cooling systems that are utilized in a data center facility provide the critical functionality to keep the equipment, the IT equipment and servers inside the data centers cooled. There's two typical, I think most frequently used systems. One's air cooled, where the air is funneled and flows through the area to keep things cool, and then a water evaporative system. And just like any other HVA system for, a residential home, there's pros and cons to both, just like there are for heat pumps versus a natural gas kind of system that you might have in your home. So we've heard from the data center industry that they are definitely looking to innovate and continue to try to develop new and other systems to help with this cooling aspect that tends to use quite a bit of energy. So, looking into alternative liquid cooling methods, geothermal, et cetera, are things that we've been talking across all of our stakeholders with. It's important to note that these cooling systems that are selected for data centers seem to be very dependent on the design of the data centers for the clients and the actual particular functionality that is anticipated within that facility. So therefore, there's a wide range of systems available. And as you may suspect, the impacts of any of those systems are also very dependent on the type of cooling system that's ultimately selected for the project design. And it is true that data centers can consume and often do consume large amounts of power. As we all know, Fairfax County is served by Dominion Energy and Novak, and we know that and have heard from these utilities that they're working to comply and add green energy initiatives and technologies into their cooling processes, especially as it relates to the Virginia Clean Economy Act. That act was passed in 2020 and essentially asked Dominion Energy and the Appalachian Electric Power utilities to produce 100% renewable electricity by 2045 and 2050, kind of respectively. However, there is an acknowledgement that expanding power users, like data centers, may make it more challenging for these utilities to meet this goal. And additionally, there are some large data center developers that also have their own corporate net zero energy goals, and they're starting the groundwork and have been working to achieve those as a means to help reduce emissions. Okay, oops, sorry about that. I went too quickly on my clicking.
All right, so we have also been researching water and air quality issues. So potential water quality issues, they definitely depend on the design of the cooling system. Not all data centers are created equal, so there's a lot of different options and different potential impacts. The evaporative cooling systems, they do typically discharge to the wastewater system, and questions have been raised about the potential increase in salinity in the Occoquan reservoir, which is potable water source. Now, this would be true with other uses that have similar systems. So we do think that more information is needed regarding the potential contribution of data centers in this regard. Water quality, of course, can also be impacted by stormwater runoff. Data centers in that way are regulated like any other use. So we do require on-site systems to control the volume of runoff and the pollutants in the runoff. Now, another issue can be that data centers have the backup emergency generators, and these require the on-site storage of diesel fuel. So they typically have about 5,000 gallons per generator stored in an above ground belly tank. Now, like any gas station or any place with a diesel storage tank, those tanks are regulated by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality to prevent leaks and spills, but questions have been raised if enhanced safety is needed. Now, with regard to air quality, it is also related to the emergency backup generators. And for that purpose, they need an air permit from the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality as well. And those air permits do limit the pollutants. In this case, the primary one of concern is nitrogen oxides. They also regulate the time of day during ozone season when they can be tested. Now, these generators are only intended for emergency use and only allowed to be used for emergency purposes, but they do need to be tested and maintained. And so typically they are run somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes a month, each one. And for noise and it seems to all be about the cooling and the generators, so anyway, the noise is also related to the HVAC system and the emergency generators, and it very much again depends, especially with the HVAC, it depends on the type of the system. I would say the good news is that noise issues, they can be modeled to determine what the impacts may be on surrounding areas. And more importantly, there are things that can be done to mitigate the impacts. Things can be enclosed, there can be baffling or silencers, they can use upgraded equipment. So there are things that can be done to mitigate noise impacts from the HVAC and the emergency generators. Regarding aesthetics, data centers, they are industrial buildings and they look like industrial buildings. As you've seen in the photos throughout this presentation, most of them maybe take on the look of a warehouse, but what can be different is that sometimes data centers are tall. So they can have these large blank facades. They can be up to in the I-5 and I-6 districts. The maximum height is 75 feet by right. So some jurisdictions are enacting standards to help improve the aesthetics. There can be requirements for differentiation along the facade, maybe a required defined entrance feature. And you can see that in the photo on the bottom. That photo is QTS in Loudoun.
Alrighty, so that kind of concludes the introduction that Carmen and I had planned for this open input session. We now want to open it up for questions and comments. Just a couple reminders. Again, keep in mind that our task tonight is focused on hearing your feedback on future recommendations for this board of supervisors matter, and that relates directly to the overall comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance for data centers. The questions on the screen are just conversation starters. We do not need to have everyone comment on each of these questions, just to try to get some thoughts flowing. And we will be posting the slides and this recording to our county webpage, and you're welcome to send comments to us afterwards. I am going to flip to our last slide, which provides that location where you can send comments to if you would like to. And if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, if you want to share, we will go ahead and start to unmute folks in just a few seconds then.
And I also want to introduce Janan Cato. She's also in the Zoning Administration Division, and she's going to be helping us keep track of things in the chat and people who want to speak. But Teams doesn't seem to, Zoom doesn't seem to let us know who raised their hand first, so we apologize, but we will try to get to everybody.
Thank you, Carmen. So to start, it looks like we already have a few questions in the chat. The first question we have from Ben, were any health and human services agencies consulted as well? The noise pollution and other effects on people neighboring data centers were one of the major concerns raised by community members.
So we have not actually spoken with like the county or other agencies for human services, but we are aware certainly about the noise pollution issue, and that's one of our areas of focus.
Okay, I believe Suzanne raised her hand to speak.
Do you mean Susan Bonney?
I'm sorry, I meant Susan Bonney.
Okay, my name is Susan Bonney. I am aware, and perhaps the staff members are too, the county has a land use component under climate guidelines for climate action and resiliency that have been delayed. They were formerly called Green Initiatives, initiated in February 2019. These have been delayed for so long and don't have a timeline, but climate-related policies should be prioritized as urgent in data center ordinances. We won't go into the climate emergency we're facing right now, but you haven't used the word climate in the presentation. I hope you will put this into your consideration. The comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance must be changed. The Sierra Club, Great Falls Group, the part of the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club, did send recommendations that I know that Katie Herman has received them, and perhaps many of you have. We do ask you, I do represent the Sierra Club as the chair in Northern Virginia, and I ask you to consider the policies that we've recommended are needed to address the impacts of data center development. And these are related to land use, energy, and carbon emissions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Next, we have another question in the chat. What percentage of Fairfax water do data centers consume at this time?
So Donna, I guess I'll take that one. I'll just say we have been working with Fairfax Water. I don't think we have that number, and we could try to get it, but they are looking at the amount of water that's used by data centers. And in general, well, we definitely know that data centers are not among the top 10 water users. No data center in the county is one of the top 10 water users in the county. Katie, do you remember? I think we have a list of land use types that were the top.
Right. So it's local government, federal government, are some university uses, a couple of apartment complexes. Let's see what else. Trying to get to that note here. Well, I can.
Yeah, and we can come back to that, but Donna, and we can try to find that out, Donna, but yeah, Fairfax Water has been working with us and providing us some information about the water usage of data centers as they compare to other uses in the county. After you speak, if you wouldn't mind putting your hand down to help us keep track.
And sorry, I was able to pull it up. And so it's federal and county government facilities, hospitals, universities, like I said, a couple larger apartment complexes, and then 1 light industrial / manufacturing business were our consolidated group of the top 10.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat from Erica. Will landowners that currently have the ability to put a data center in their allotted zone be grandfathered into their laws, or have to abide by the new guidelines or proposed / approved guidelines? And are you all collaborating with the City of Alexandria to ensure cohesion and sensibility for those neighborhoods that border the city limit?
So Erica, I would say that, the structure of any new guidelines and standards, that would be determined at the time of future amendments. Typically, that's not how zoning ordinance amendments work. Usually, and you can find this in the zoning ordinance, there's Appendix 1 that gives you the kind of the standard provisions relating to previous approval. So typically, the way that works is if somebody has a lawfully existing use or a previous approval, so not just a previous right. But again, that would probably be the subject of future review. We're kind of at a more preliminary stage than that.
Thanks, Carmen. There's also a follow-up question that Erica included that I missed earlier. Do you all plan to reach out to those residents neighboring a data center to get their feedback on things to consider since they are currently living in it?
I guess I can say that sounds like a good idea. We like to do outreach, and we appreciate everybody coming this evening and providing input.
Thank you, Carmen. Next, Ifani, I apologize for mispronouncing your name, but you had your hand raised.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Ifani Obira. I live in the Brent Point community. I didn't hear anything about a potential health impact, which I'm not surprised that it is missing, but I think it is very relevant because I know that it is very easy to minimize the potential impact of such potential chronic exposure to noise that will have on health. And when you talk with people who do not really have a lot of experience in that space, they tend to think about sleep deprivation and other common stuff that has to do with sleep deprivation. But one of the things that I know from personal research, because part of my study for my PhD was using noise to modulate cell signaling. And I am very concerned as someone who lives in this community, that we're minimizing a potential factor that can modulate how cells signal to themselves, especially at a chronic state, because that's what will happen when we have data centers very close to people's homes. And my fear, and this is something I told my wife much earlier when I heard about the plan to put a data center near us, that we are at the very early stage of what people who didn't really believe in things like smoking and the impact it will have on health. That's what noise actually looks like. But because there is a lack of research in that area, people don't really know enough yet. So I would urge you to consider very strongly the potential chronic, the effect of chronic exposure to such low frequency noise that we will be having our community exposed to, that these centers will bring in here. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia, I believe you have your hand raised and you're next.
Yes, thank you. Hi. I had a couple questions here. One of them I will follow up on Ifani's comment. We had an acoustician send in a white paper and a video regarding the low frequency noise that is produced from data centers and how it can travel through barriers and around trees and things that normally higher octave bands would not be able to go through or bypass. Has that video and white paper testimony reached you as the work group?
I do think that that was provided by if it was provided to the planning commission, I did see that was forwarded. Is that, or if there's something different, then maybe not. But if it's what was given to the planning commission, I think they did pass that along to us.
Okay, and so so my question then is that going to be taken into account when data centers, when we do try to create ordinances and such? This is very specific to this industry, and we should be taking into account that type of noise, not just at a dBA level, but at a dBdB and dBc level, to determine where the data center should be put, because those frequencies travel much further or farther, excuse me, than other frequencies, other types of frequencies. So I'm strongly urging you to consider that data centers need to provide a frequency and octave spectra information as part of their application, so that those can be determined whether they should be allowed within a certain distance. And I know you believe that there's noise mitigation that can occur, but the HVAC systems must be open to the air. So there's only a certain amount of barriers that they can put up. And as I said before, because of their wavelengths, they can get through certain barriers much more easily than other types of sound. And so that really needs to be considered, especially with regard to not only humans, but to wildlife, which I didn't see any talk about wildlife putting these next to parks, because they are also impacted by levels as low as 40 dBA. And yet when we're putting them next to these parks, their levels will be more like 60 dBA. So that's obviously something that not only the National Park Service, but the Federal Highway Administration, and even international studies have shown that it leads to animals retreating from the area. And then that leads, of course, as they determined in Arizona, to deforestation, because the animals are not there to help propagate the forest. So I'd like to also just strongly suggest that wildlife is taken into account in terms of noise, not only just from one data center, but the cumulative noise from data centers within close proximity to each other, because that's also not something I had seen you mention in terms of the impact of noise. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we had a question. No, we have Tyler with their hand raised.
Great. Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks to Carmen, Katie, and Janan for this info session. It's been really helpful. My question is more both first a comment and then kind of a process question. Comment-wise, I just really encourage as you begin working on kind of transferring your findings to recommendations, that you highly consider changing data centers from by right to requiring approval by the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. As a way of background, my community in Brent Point, which I'm the HOA president of, currently has a data center that's been rejected by the Planning Commission last year, but we've been hearing that they're planning to try to develop the currently zoned I-5 section into a data center. And so we're kind of left vulnerable at the moment with kind of no recourse or ability to kind of challenge that as the county works through this. So the by right thing really leaves communities vulnerable. So I'd encourage you to recommend removing that. And so my process question is really at what point is the county going to be kind of transferring the research topics that you just presented to kind of specific recommendations to the county? Are those going to be presented at the upcoming land use meetings in later this month, or is that farther down the road? I know that the county directed both kind of findings and recommendations. I think we're only seeing findings right now as opposed to kind of proposed zoning recommendations. So I'm curious if you can elaborate a little bit more on that. And then related to that, will there be another community input session when you get to the actual policy recommendations? I think many of us are interested in that and would be very interested in providing some feedback and comments on the actual policy recommendations. Thanks.
Carmen, I can try to take a stab at this and just let me know if you want to add anything. So, right, we are going to be presenting some initial thoughts to the Board of Supervisors during their during an upcoming Land Use Policy Committee meeting here in October. And then based on that, we're going to work towards integrating some feedback from tonight, feedback from the Board of Supervisors into a report that is referenced here as an early winter deliverable that will be provided to the Board of Supervisors. That report will summarize our findings and research and provide that preliminary analysis. And at that point, it is up to the Board of Supervisors to determine the next appropriate steps based on what staff has prepared. And they may direct county staff to prepare proposed amendments to the comprehensive plan and or the zoning ordinance. And then those amendments would go through their own community engagement process that would include public hearings before the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Hopefully that helps answer most of your question. Maybe I missed a point, so feel free to clarify.
Just a quick follow-up then. So the recommendations that you all will be providing to the Board of Supervisors kind of in that report won't necessarily be specific recommendations to, let's say, amend the zoning ordinance to remove by right or amend the zoning ordinance to require higher or additional like noise things or anything like that. It's not at that stage. Is that correct? Or could your report include those kind of recommendations?
I think that, we're going to provide a few different options to the board against a bit of an array of considerations that they can take into account. We will not be providing draft revised language to the comprehensive plan or to the zoning ordinance for them to review and take into consideration in that report in the December timeframe. It would just be that preliminary analysis and some key findings and maybe some options for them to consider, because there may be slightly different paths that could be taken moving forward.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tyler, for your question, and Katie. We have a question in the chat from Brian Sterling. Would you please provide a list of all stakeholders with whom county staff have consulted or collected information from outside of this public forum, including data center companies and industry representatives?
I can try to, again, take a stab at this, and Carmen, back me up if you'd like. I mean, at this point, I believe we've spoken with over 20 external stakeholders. I don't have the list in front of me. That is something that, would be made available and we could capture in that report that would be provided to the Board of Supervisors in December.
Thank you, Katie. Okay, next, Keith Elliott.
Yes, hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for your time and for the input that you're giving us all here. I think a couple of concerns. One, the by right. You can look in the chat box. It's quite a bit. And if you look on the internet, like on social media and stuff, the by right is a big issue. I think you should really consider changing that, because when you take away a person's ability to speak about it, it takes away their trust in government. And then on top of it, when you have data centers are just based on this, meeting here, and based on the one in Pleasant Valley, you get over, close to 500 signatures against it. It's a big topic, and a lot of people have different views of it. So, and regardless of the zoning and stuff like that, I think you really ought to put forth to the board and everybody about the by right. It really needs to be considered that data centers itself should not be done by right. The other thing, you raised the thing about taxes. Has anything, and like we know that Ashburn has, it's data center alley, right? So, and has anybody done any research with Ashburn as far as the different data centers that they have regarding the taxes that they're earning out of like the first year, the second year, the third year, the fifth year? I've heard from different individuals on the tax base that they depreciate the equipment, so the tax that they earn after a certain number of years is actually going down. Now, I'm in real estate, and I know you have the land, you get very little tax based on the land, but when you have a warehouse, I guess it goes up, and you got the transfer tax, and you get some taxes there. But I'd love to see you guys do a little study based on year 2, 3, 4, 5. What are the data centers paying as far as taxes are concerned? And the last point is I think on one of your slides, it said like a 35-foot buffer from a residential community. That's nowhere near enough. I do real estate, and that really will affect the property values. Even on top of it, with all the internet chat and all the other stuff that you read, the stories, the articles from newspapers or online news organizations, the data centers, it's got a negative connotation to it. So 35 feet is pretty darn close. And I don't think anybody on this call, or you guys yourselves, or even the Board of Supervisors would want something that close. So I would, that along with the by right needs to be thoroughly investigated based on where, like even Ashburn, we know that's the alley for it. So I think you ought to be doing a lot of research based on Ashburn itself. And those are pretty much my comments I'd like to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Keith. We have a question from Mary in the chat. And if I do miss any questions in the chat, please feel free to send them again. The question from Mary is, recognizing that each recommendation is unique, what is a typical or historical time frame from the county providing recommendations to the Board of Supervisors implementing policy changes?
I think that, for zoning ordinance amendments, you definitely nailed it when you said everything is unique. We do have certain advertising requirements. So in addition to outreach, I would say, in my experience, the outreach component and the research and outreach component, that's definitely important and takes a certain amount of time. And then there are, our zoning ordinance amendments go through a process where there's authorization, and then you have to advertise, so maybe after authorization, we've already done our research. So the process is we do our research, we do our outreach. So that takes however long it takes. And then there's authorization. And then there's going to be like a month before a planning commission public hearing. If we have to have a second planning commission public hearing, it's going to be probably another month, and then another month until the Board of Supervisors. So, all of that is to say it does take a little bit of time, but they can be done, something that's, some things can go a lot faster than other things. I don't know anything about comp plan amendments.
No, I was going to say it's about the same type of path forward for comprehensive plan amendments as well. It depends on the breadth and array of the topic is in terms of, and the extent of and breadth of community engagement.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Anne Bennett. We have seen that past data and performance does not predict future resource need, particularly with energy per dominion and PJM. We can also expect increases in water resources for higher cooling demand due to artificial intelligence. What specific sustainability measures are you considering for the buildings, clean energy, et cetera?
Thanks, Anne. I would say that, we're certainly continuing to look into this, and, we acknowledge, I think, during the presentation that energy efficiency with the building shell itself and the systems that are used within it is an important component. So it is something we're continuing to look at, and we'll put some findings together related to that.
Thanks, Katie. Next, we have Jeffrey, their hand up.
Okay. All right. Thank you. My name's Jeff Parnes. I'm the Sully District Joint Land Use and Transportation Co-Chair. We recently spoke about a data center that was going in south of Route 50 in the Chantilly Auto Park area. We presented our comments to the Board of Supervisors and to the Planning Commission. I wanted to be certain that you got that email, that resolution that listed our concerns. If not, I'd be happy to enumerate them today.
Are they long? Can you enumerate them quickly?
Oh, yeah, I can. Hold on. Let me get them and I will enumerate them. Hold on one second. It's my pleasure to do so. I will pull up that document, and we try to send it to the various folks who might be concerned, and I'll pull that up right now. Sully District.
While he's doing that, is there an email that we should be sending our comments to?
Yes, it is the email address now on the screen. I can leave this up for a little while longer.
Is this presentation available online? Can we get it?
It will be when we're finished with the recording and processing the recording of tonight's meeting.
Okay, and you have the mailing list of the people who attended so that you can send it to us?
It'll be posted online, so
well, yeah, I understand, but
wants to can grab it.
Finding it posting online is always hard to do, especially since I can't copy that wording that's on the screen. If you put it in the chat, then I can copy it, but right now it's impossible to capture that which is on the screen without retyping it, and I'll always make an error when I do that. So if you could put both of those things in the chat, that'll make it easier. But in any case, the Joint Committee acknowledges that there were numerous community objections, which included the magnitude of potential negative impacts on water quality, especially on the Cub Run, which flows into the Occoquan Reservoir, impacts on the electrical grid from a use currently lacking sufficient electrical capacity. We were told that Dominion Power would have to build the substations, which would be then put into the capital costs, and we, the residents of Western Fairfax, would have to pay for the installation of a substation that would benefit the data center more than anybody else, and we'd be paying for it. As such as the increased cost to the local consumers for paying the electric infrastructure upgrades, the inability to evaluate impacts on the adjacent RC residential community, especially floodplains, air pollution impacts from 27 diesel generators, impacts on the local water supply for unmitigated use without any cap of water quantity of water to be used. Water is always a sparse commodity, and they have unlimited drawing rights, basically. The questions we had about the Park Authority, but that was specific to that area. We had impacts of noise levels on the surrounding residences, including cumulative impacts of noise from all sources, failure to indicate the height impacts on the increased FAR and density on this site and the western edge of an industrial area, conflicts between proposed transportation access, and ongoing increased awareness of the negative impacts and proliferation of data centers. I can take this and type in it into the chat so that you will have a reference to this document so that you can review it in detail. It was sent to the Board of Supervisors, to the Planning Commission, to the Environmental Quality Advisory Commission, to the Board of Zoning Appeals, to the Fairfax County Executive, to the Fairfax County Deputy Executive for Planning. We sent it to the county's state senators and delegates. We sent it to our membership as well. So I'm going to copy the URL of this resolution and I will put it into the chat, and that way you'll have it for reference purposes. Okay then? But we spoke and we are concerned in Sully and other places in the county. This is a preferred, easy usage. But in some cases, it's put within 35 feet of residential development. I know, for example, on the Air and Space Museum Parkway, there are townhomes and multi-story garden apartments that used to back to the EDS property. The EDS property was converted to an Amazon data center, and it backs basically to those residential communities with no significant buffering. Whatever trees that were there have been ripped down to facilitate the development of that parcel. And it's a shame that these people who thought they were living next to an office park that was relatively quiet are now going to be living next to a data center with its incumbent noise and pollution. By right is not a way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we will contact the Board of Supervisors clerk to see if we can obtain the.
And even so, I am going to put into the chat that which will make it easy for you to have. Okay. And I thank you for that as well.
Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Jeffrey. All right. Next, Catherine, you have your hand up. Catherine Carver.
Hi, I'm Catherine Carver. I'm a member of the Sierra Club Great Falls Group, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about the data center development. I was going to mention something about the energy requirements for the data center. The data center industry in Virginia achieved a peak metered load of almost 2.8 gigawatts in 2022 and is expected to grow to 13 gigawatts by 2038. This data center growth is driving Dominion's reliance on fossil fuel generation. If Dominion's 2023 integrated resource plan goes into effect, Dominion has projected to double greenhouse gas emissions to 36 million metric tons by 2048. Regulation of the data center industry should be structured to meet the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which you mentioned, has a goal of 73% clean energy by 2035 and 100% clean energy by 2045, and the Fairfax County CCAP interim goal of 50% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. We should mitigate for increases in local carbon emissions attributed to new data centers by ensuring those impacts are measured and integrated into county climate planning and in conformance with county emissions goals. How can you reconcile the two?
I'm sorry, Catherine, was there a question in there? Could you repeat it?
Well, how can you manage the great energy needs of data centers and manage to meet the climate goals with the Virginia Clean Economy Act and the CCAP?
So yes, we hear your concern, and that is something that we are researching and talking to Dominion about as well. I will note that the data center developers, they do have their own goals in terms of climate and carbon neutrality, and certain goals for that as well.
Thank you, Carmen. We have a question in the chat from Keith. To what depth are these facilities able to be built underground? And could increased depth allow some mitigation of building temperatures?
I know I, for one, am not qualified to speak to that. I don't know if there's anyone from our staff team that is on the call that wants to say anything. All right. Hearing no, I'll say thank you for the comment, and I think we don't know the answer to that right now.
Thanks, Carmen. We have another question in the chat from Dale. Brian Sterling, I see your question, but I would like to get to the questions from people who haven't asked or spoke yet. We have a question from Dale. There are significant concerns about the diesel backup process. If I understand it correctly, it isn't one generator for the entire building. The number of generators is based on the square footage and power demand. If I understood the Loudoun County level of server buildings, there are over 400 diesel generators either there or planned. You fire up all of those generators, there will be a significant air quality issue. Are you reviewing that issue?
Yes, we are. That is definitely something that's one of our research topics. So the generators, you're correct. It's not like just one generator, and how many generators, it depends on the power utilization. So they are there in case there's an interruption in their power supply. You don't want the data center to go down. So that's what they're there for. They're only for emergency use. And they are subject to air permits from DEQ for the pollutants.
Thanks, Carmen. Next, we have Cynthia Shang.
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry, just again on that topic. The DEQ, I was in conversation with their program manager there, and they do not do any cumulative studies or take any data regarding the number of generators, diesel generators, and their air pollutants as a whole. So they're not going to tell you that, well, 4,000, okay, that's enough. We've reached our limit. They are not taking that type of data, and neither is the EPA. So I think we need to be very careful when we state that the DEQ and the EPA are monitoring these systems and that's all going to be okay, because that's not. We have to be a lot more careful as a county and as a state when we continue to allow these data centers with 27, 50, however many generators that keep accumulating, because the DEQ is not monitoring that. So I think it's a misnomer to say that. So I just wanted to clarify that. And the other thing, as far as cumulative effects, it's not just the air quality, but the noise as well. That is also not monitored by anyone. When we do these zoning issues, we don't decide that, oh, well, there's already 2 data centers, 100 yards away. We just say that that one data center that they're now applying for, how is their noise going to affect the area? But we don't take into account the cumulative effect of the other data centers that are 100 yards away. So I think it really needs to be, that word cumulative really needs to be somehow incorporated into the language of the ordinances to make sure that certain areas are not overly impacted by noise and by air pollution from diesel generators. And especially we should consider enforcing that the data center industry use alternatives to diesel, because there's plenty of them out there. They're just a little more expensive. And so they're not willing to do that unless we ask them and require them to do so. So please, I would again recommend you take cumulative effects of noise and air pollution into account when you make your recommendations. As well as the size of the data center in terms of megawatts. We're not asking them, we never do, and that's a failure, I think, on our part, because a 15 megawatt data center does not require a new substation, but a 75 megawatt data center does require a new substation. And because of that, Novec and Dominion both have to raise their rates, as was mentioned before. And if we don't take that into account in our ordinance as to how much load they're going to be drawing, then we don't know the generators that they're going to use, because that's how they determine how many generators they're going to have. So we need to really put into the ordinance the careful consideration of the amount of megawatts that each data center is using, and especially in regard to the cumulative effects within an area. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. We have a question from Jim in the chat. Are you reporting on this topic to the Board of Supervisors Land Use Committee in a couple weeks? Will there be opportunity for another Q&A with the citizens beforehand? And what is the timeline for comp plan or zoning ordinance amendments?
All right, I think we answered this one just a little bit ago, but maybe you joined late. So we are presenting to the board's Land Use Policy Committee on October 17th, and then to the Planning Commission's Land Use Process Review Committee. I think it's on October, I forget the date, 20 something. You maybe go back to that slide. And then our report is due by the end of the year, but you know, this is all preliminary. It's findings and options would be laid out. And then if the board directs staff to work on comprehensive plan and or zoning ordinance amendments, that would be subject to its own process, and that would follow in 2024.
Thank you, Carmen. Next, Fran, you have your hand up to speak. You're muted, Fran. Please unmute. Fran, you're still muted and we can't hear you.
How are we doing now?
Great.
I'm sorry about that. I had that reversed. First of all, thank you both very much for the presentation. Much appreciated. I know you both are not the driving force, so please don't take offense at my comments. But I have somewhat of a question, and then I'd just like to repeat a concern that was expressed by, I think, virtually all of the residents of Pleasant Valley. My wife and I are 35-year residents of Pleasant Valley. We have also had a real estate business with RE/MAX for about that same period of time. So we're dealing with home buyers and sellers all the time. And just want to offer a perspective that might somehow be able to be factored into, your deliberations. But before I do that, this is actually a question, and I'd like to make a quick comment, then I'll end. But in any case, all of the residents and the businesses in the area surrounding where this proposal might actually occur, I've had to follow all the zoning requirements and I guess you could say play by the rules, but it would seem that this is the exception. And of course, it's the people who live in the area, as well as the businesses that will be impacted, that will be, the folks who would be most dramatically impacted by whatever any of these issues that are problematic come to pass. So I wasn't sure why they were the exception, and I'm sure there's an answer to that. But the general gist of my comment is that something like we mentioned at my wife and I mentioned at the last session. It seems to me, I offer this respectfully, this is really dropping a bomb on the residents, not only of Pleasant Valley, but on the businesses in the area and the adjacent communities as well. It's a quality of life bomb because by any measure, I think it will have a significant, if not dramatic, impact on the quality of life of people in the area. It also, just from a very practical point of view, I think drops a bit of a financial bomb, because one of the major concerns that we have on the real estate side for people is that this has the potential to make this somewhat of a tainted community. You know, people buy houses and they want to know what the local surrounding is. When an area develops a reputation for having too many undesirables, that really hurts the home values of the property owners in the area. So that, I think, should be considered. And I think, given all of the list of problematic issues, it would really be throwing caution to the wind to proceed forward with this without doing a whole lot more research, because I think this has the potential to be something that people would really regret, in the future. The investors will have received the benefits of their investment, but all the people who are responsible for making this decision will still be accountable. So I would just like to offer that as a perspective from a couple of people who are working with home buyers and sellers on a regular basis. This really is problematic on many different levels. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Fran. I believe William Marsh on our staff team wanted to provide some input.
Appreciate it. Thank you. This is actually for Cynthia Shang, who spoke a few minutes ago on one of your points. I'm helping out Carmen and Katie. Work in the Land Development Services Department. I was one of the staff who met with Department of Environmental Quality staff, who it sounds like you met with the same person. You mentioned, Cynthia, that the DEQ's permit does not actually test anything on the generator. I want to share what I've learned in the conversation and then in the permits I reviewed, make sure that jives with what you understand. So my understanding is a sample of the diesel generators get tested for air quality initially around the time that the data center is starting to get energized. And that report goes to DEQ. The permit's then going to talk about the performance of the generators. They're going to say you have to keep things in good working order. And then there is actually a measurement of fuel use during the year. So subsequent reports that go to DEQ speak to fuel consumption with the assumption that the diesel generators are well maintained. And so that initial reading is one that would maintain itself. Now, that's my read of it. I just wanted to hear from you. Is that also the impression that you got?
Yes, that's exactly right. They do say that they do what they call a sample test at the beginning, and that they do measure. There's some equipment on the generators themselves that have the ability to tell them the amount of fuel usage that they've had, so that they can tell whether they've gone over, I think it's 500 hours, because that's what they're permitted for. But my concern, and that was what they were trying to address in my phone call with them, was that they do not take that information as a whole in terms of all of the generators. So you have 27 generators, let's say, at one site. Yes, they have sampling monitoring for each of the generators, but they don't say, well, I've got 27 generators here, 50 yards away at the next data center, I have another 30 generators, another 100 yards away, I have another 30 generators. That's not their responsibility to try to determine if all of them went off at once. Would that be bad? Which probably, yes, it would be. But yes, so your information is also what I received as well.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a question I wanted to go back to from Brian in the chat. Have you considered the siting of data centers as a discrete topic as a way to avoid / mitigate issues in the other topic areas like noise and air quality? For example, should the county consider development limitations in commercial or industrial districts that border residential districts?
Janine, I'm sorry, who did you say that was from? I'm wondering if you would like to unmute and tell us a little bit more about your comment.
The question was from Brian Sterling in the chat.
Brian, are you there? Do you want to unmute and provide your comment?
All right. Well, Carmen, I saw you mentioned in another response to someone that data centers are defined separately in the zoning ordinance. So I'm not sure if that's what Brian's question was alluding to, but
yeah.
Regardless.
All right. So I scrolled back and I was able to read it again. And so data centers in the zoning ordinance, they are a defined separate use. And the zoning ordinance also includes use-specific standards for different uses. So that's where we can develop different standards that can apply to data centers, and they can apply even if it's a by right data center. It could be by right if it meets certain standards. And that can be included in the zoning ordinance. There can also be standards if they're going to be approved by a special exception. Absolutely, there are things that can be inserted into the zoning ordinance for a use, and that's tailored to that specific use and so forth. So absolutely.
Thanks, Carmen. Next, we have Scott with their hand raised to speak.
Oh, thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. I'm calling in behalf of the height recommendation. I see that you'd listed at 75 feet. In the new mega data center proposal, and it could be anywhere else in the county or perhaps pending or by right, this new special application is moving to 110 feet. At what level is the county going to look into flight path concerns, FAA concerns, other noise concerns from height expansion of data center height and sound travel at many different levels? I'm kind of worried about enhanced noise from the height of these buildings. I mean, why stop? Or is it the county stopping at special exemptions of 110 feet? Why not 145? Why not for 5 stories? I mean, when does the height change at 75 feet? So it's kind of like noise, vibration, air pollution around, air lift density study for the equipment, which is both Boeing and Airbus, for flight patterns, thrust levels of landing and takeoff, all are expected to change by the height requirements of data centers. Has that been investigated, looked at, engineered, discussed, reviewed with FAA, Airport Authority? Please expand. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. It's our understanding that the FAA controls the navigable airspace in and around the Dulles Airport and regulates structure heights, buildings, cell towers, all those taller types of uses near airports. They have what they call a Part 77 study that generates imaginary surfaces that might pose an obstruction to air navigation, especially for takeoff and landings. And this information and approaches kind of used to help them understand for their airspace what is or may not be suitable. And it's our understanding that that these applications for data centers, whether it's by right or for entitlements, have to go through and have a submission to the FAA for this type of requirement.
Okay, so a follow-up question. The county's not looking at the height difference for sound of a 75-foot building and how far that travels versus 110, or the next special application at 130?
So for many of the, oh, I'm sorry, Carmen, did you want to go?
I was just going to, clarify that for height, there's a maximum height and it's controlled by the zoning district for county purposes. The FAA has their authority as well. But for county purposes, we have height limits based on the zoning district, and then an increase in that height requires the special exception approval by the Board of Supervisors. And as far as noise concerns, they're not, like under the zoning ordinance, they're not tied to height right now, right? But if they're doing a noise study by an acoustical expert, then that is to take into account the location of where the sound is generated and topography and other things, that may be blocking the way and so forth. So their study is to take that sort of information into account. But that would be on a case-by-case basis, right? I mean, that's not, it has to be on a case-by-case basis. So, so that's how it would work right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Anne in the chat. Has Fairfax reached out to Loudon to learn from them? They have been at this for a long time.
Again, I don't have the list of stakeholders open, but we have coordinated with many in the industry and some environmental stakeholder groups who are very familiar with the industry as it is located in Loudoun County. But that's something, again, we can publish in our report of who's been part of our stakeholder team.
Thank you, Katie. We have a question from Larry in the chat. And Jeffrey, I see that you have your hand raised. I just want to get to the chat questions first from people who haven't asked any questions yet. Larry Gulfer asks in the chat, because of the negative impacts to the environment and to health by the use of diesel fuel for data center backup generators, how will alternative sources of energy be promoted by the county, such as natural gas, energy storage, and hydrogen fuel cell generation? How will alternative sources of energy be promoted by the county?
So that is also part of our research and fact-finding mission that we've been on for the past several months, is talking, with several data center developers as well as others in the industry to determine what the latest technology allows for when it comes to the use of renewable energy. There's so much technology that's changing every few years in that industry, which is really exciting. And we're hoping to pull in the information that we know and from what we're hearing from a design standpoint, and making some and reporting out some findings when we have that pulled together.
Thank you, Katie. Jeffrey, if you'd like to unmute and speak.
Thank you again. My name is Jeff Parnes. When ZMOD was passed by the Board of Supervisors, the Land Use Committee of the Board Chair, Kathy Smith, facility supervisor, asked staff to create a special or address the questions about by right data centers, if I'm not mistaken. So that happened last year. My assumption that your efforts today are in response to the direction of the board to your organization to consider the by right allowance of data centers that ZMod implemented. And if that is the case, I would expect that the staff, you folks, should come back to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors with a plan amendment that modifies ZMod that says the citizens and our technical expertise have said that the following things should be considered. You've indicated that, at least from what I've heard, is that you're looking into it, but you don't know what the output should be. Isn't the direction that the Board of Supervisors gave you by their action a proposed amendment back to them? Thank you.
So Jeff, we're going to respond to the board matter and the directions in the board matter by the end of the year, which is the time frame. But that response to the board matter, that is not in and of itself a comprehensive plan amendment or a zoning ordinance amendment. So if the board does receive the report and they direct us further to do work on those amendments, then we will do so.
So what you're saying is that you could make this report and the board would say, thanks for the information, and let it stand as it stands now. Is that not correct?
That is, of course, correct.
Okay, well then it is incumbent upon us as citizens that when you send your report, that we turn up the heat and say, please make this so, rather than just sit in a file someplace and smolder. Thank you. I should say molder. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have one last question in the chat, and also if there was a question that was missed or an issue that was raised in the chat that we didn't address during the meeting, we'll be reviewing that and capturing those comments and questions. So the last question in the chat is from Donna Jacobson. How does any comp plan changes or zoning ordinance changes which come out of your study of the issue affect data centers which are already in the pipeline?
So Donna, for zoning ordinance purposes, that sort of thing, as I mentioned before, the provisions relating to previous approvals, you can look at that in Appendix 1 of the zoning ordinance. That can be, fine-tuned and determined at the time of the amendment. But typically, as you'll see in that Appendix 1, there are certain approvals which, if they have already been granted, that then they can rely on those. But each one, that's kind of determined at the time of the amendment. And I guess maybe I can say for comp plan purposes, the comprehensive plan comes into play most often when somebody is proposing a rezoning or special exception or something like that. And so any proposal that's going through the process would be reviewed against the comprehensive plan in effect at that time. All right, so we have come to the end of our time just about, and I think you all have been really great, and I appreciate all of the feedback and all of the comments. So we are, as we've said, we're recording this and we will post the slides as well. And if you think of any additional comments, please do reach out to us. That email address, it's not just in the chat, it'll be on the end of the slides. And then there's the web page, and you can always go back to that and find out how to contact us. So please do. And then, as we said, we'll be presenting to the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission later this month. Those are both televised, so you can watch those. And then if those presentations spark any comments, please do reach out. So thank you for your giving us your Thursday evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing so.